Wonderful to be here with all of you. I wanted to start by bringing Mamta in. Mamta, I thought we could start off by just getting an understanding from your wealth of experience on the context basically around the fact that in a country like ours, where we have so many children at the moment that are eligible, obviously, for primary education, that scale up is something that's extremely critical, and it's something that we're still evolving in terms of how to go about it. What are the priorities that you think this scale up should be about? So there are various ways in which this can scale up as an ecosystem, but how would you prioritize it basis your experience and everything that you and the foundation, Bharti Foundation, have done so far?
Thank you. So just a few sentences on my experience and work that Bharti Airtel Foundation, we are now Bharti Airtel Foundation, has done. So we started in, and we decided that we'll work in education, especially primary education. But we thought it would be prudent if we ourselves first work in the villages and see what it means to deliver quality education. You're starting from where the school be placed, how the school should look, what kind of teachers come in, and how do we train them. Some of the philosophies that have guided Bharti Airtel Foundation always is that whatever we do has to be replicable and scalable, which meant that we kept things simple, we kept things low cost, no cost, and we depended a lot on people's ability to innovate, and I use innovate in inverted commas because everything doesn't have to be innovation. You know, sometimes it's a teacher in the class, she should decide what TLM I want to use, not necessarily an innovation, right? So how do you give agency to people who are on the ground? In 2006, I think we were among first organizations which set up schools with a pre-primary section, right? And what a journey it has been, because we realized, and I think one of the speakers spoke about it, everybody is talking about FLN today, focuses a lot on literacy and numeracy. But in our schools, Satya Bharti schools, the focus has been so much on joy, so much on looking at their socio-emotional aspects, to look at, like I say, in our schools, children are talkative, children are naughty, they are inquisitive, because you have to bring those things in before literacy and numeracy comes in, and that has been our learning. So even today, when we are working with government schools, I think in the recent years, a lot of work is happening. I mean, we have experts sitting over here. A lot of work is happening in FLN. A lot of modules are coming in. We had Anita ji from Delhi talk about it. There's so much of focus various state governments are bringing in. Wherever we go in to support FLN, I think we talked about the surround sound, right? And we believe a lot in surround sound. I remember I was once sitting in front of an education secretary and he said, we're like Ayurvedic medicine. We work slow, but we work well, you know? So we look at making schools happy, making teachers happy, making children happy. Because once that happens, then everything else will sit well. So my only one thing that, or if you say two things that I want to look at is, first, making sure that teachers have the agency. Second, very important thing is, we all talk about, hey, teachers quality. As we were talking about it earlier, our biggest pain point is quality of teacher trainers. Even on FLN today, you don't have trainers who integrate activities with pedagogy. You don't have trainers who understand 5 domains. And how do you integrate that? It is not just about literacy and numeracy. And I'll end with this last line. I mean, when we set up our own schools, first thing before hiring teachers, we hired trainers and we did a very long, something that we call boot camp, to first make sure that trainers are ready to receive teachers, right? So the need for training and trainers actually is very critical today.
I think that's a great point to bring in, Anil, in fact, because Anil, with your wealth of, I mean, there's always so much being spoken about the teacher to student ratio, if you will. And I think, again, going from what Nagma mentioned earlier, these are measurable metrics for sure. But let's talk about consequences. Let's talk about the potential that training that Mamta has alluded to, as well as from your experience of having looked at pedagogy for teachers. Where does the need stand today? Again, a similar sort of priorities question for you, but specifically in the area around training teachers, around teacher development pedagogy, if you will.
If you look at, training probably cannot be seen in isolation. So one is to understand, for example, what's the purpose of education, be it at whatever stage, right? So one of the things, as far as school education is concerned, is to enable students to make sense of the world around them and the current realities. Two is to equip them with conceptual tools, frameworks, lenses, call what you may, to make sense of the world that they are yet to come across, right? So, because the future is uncertain, knowledges of tomorrow are unpredictable, so you need to be able to learn those things. And you cannot learn those things today. You cannot learn the facts of tomorrow today, but you can be able to, you should be able to learn the facts of tomorrow starting with the frameworks of today. So, and that's not an easy thing to do, because we tend to focus more on what we know, but we don't tend to focus on opening doors. At a very, very fundamental level, literacy and numeracy are doors. They're not knowledge by itself, right? So literacy and numeracy opens the doors to, for example, literacy opens the doors to reading, and through reading, to engage with other kinds of knowledges. Same with numeracy. Numeracy is the starting point for computational thinking, for example, right? So, when I talk about conceptual tools, you can start with numeracy and literacy and go on to things so that you open the doors to broader understanding. So that's the first thing. When it comes to training, for example, so then you look at what does it mean to be a professional as a teacher. So we tend to think of, for example, why do we look at teacher training? For example, when we look at a field like medicine, for example, right? We'll never see an external intervention like the way we see in schools. In schools, corporations and many others, NGOs and others, make interventions. I'm not saying it in a derogatory sense. Because it's the need of the hour. But you don't see those kind of interventions happening when it comes to engineering or a medical profession. They will not even let you in. So then we need to ask the question of how do we take this so-called profession, what kind of interpretation do we have as when it comes to teacher as a professional, right? So if you understand teacher as a professional, then your development efforts should go into making that professional, not about teacher professional development seen from a very strategic end goal kind of thing, as well as some kind of a means to help students just achieve learning outcomes. That probably is not the right way to look at teacher professional development. What is a teacher? What is teacher as a professional? Is teacher part of the scholar community? We talk of content knowledge. What kind of content knowledge should a teacher have? Is a teacher somebody who is familiar with the big ideas in that particular subject? Does she know to pursue the ideas that are not yet there in that field, for example? I'm not saying that a teacher is the same as a researcher in academia, but teacher too is part of the scholar community in a way, right? So then the way we look at professional development itself changes. So I think these are some of the things that we need to think about rather than just going straight into the XYZ. These are the things I need to train teachers on.
I think this is a great moment to bring you in. Like I said, it's logically just coming together, and the kind of initiative that you represent with educational initiatives, Pranav, everything that Mamta has talked about setting the foundation and then scaling up and looking at teachers and students beyond the traditional ways of looking at FLN and so on. And then with you coming in with a very interesting technological solution to kind of help pave the way for that scale up, to look at it differently as well, as Anil pointed. What are some of the things that you think will tick in a context like today, given your experience with EI? And what are anything that you can share with us in terms of some of the things that you're doing to be able to bring that different perspective to what we need to do now?
I'm quite bullish about, let's say, the role of a human in a child's education. I think that's obviously well documented, it's obvious. But I'm very bearish about whether we will have enough number of them of a sufficient quality to address 300 million students who go to school every day. Deepika showed a baby is born every second, which means 25 million students that will be entering grade 1 or any particular grade. And at India's scale of 9 million teachers, I think we cannot go the linear pathway, which is to do cascade teacher training or to do any other form that's happening right now. So if IPL wants to target the 4 biggest states of India to do it, it's got to think non-linearly, right? So what's non-linear? And Ink Talks or TED Talks is an idea can scale very fast, right? So it can capture the imagination. That's a non-linear thing. So how do we seed the right ideas and how do we do FLN differently? Technology can scale non-linearly. We've seen that with the Aadhaar example. We've seen that with the GPay example. Those are the ways I would have to think, because I don't think in the next 5 years we're going to have 9 million well-trained people who can teach ranging from multiplication to algebra to concepts of magnetism. It's not happened for 75 years. It's not going to happen in the next 5 years. So in that context that a human is important, but we will not have high-quality humans do this, I think that's the bridge that technology can form, where technology can personalize it for students in a way even that the world's best teacher will actually benefit, right? So even if you're the world's best teacher, you have a classroom of 40 students, you just don't have time and energy to cater to each child. And that's what technology can do beautifully, where it can provide a personalized pathway to that. And this value proposition just goes up for the average teacher, and it goes dramatically up for the bottom quartile teacher. Now, what can technology do for people who don't have access to technology? It can essentially diagnose where students are making mistakes, what they're not learning, and give that idea to teachers who work in non-electrified, non-internet settings. For example, EI for the last 23 years has been assessing students. And for the first 20 of them, we could have told you that half of grade 4 students can't do math, which is also what Pratham's answer sort of says. But nobody for those 20 years said why or what are those mistakes they do. So 3 years ago, we essentially built this tool where we tracked every single keystroke of a child, and then we also sat with thousands of students and saw them on pen and paper. And now I can tell you that you can get 28 multiplied by 17 wrong 13 distinct ways with the frequency distribution of what mistake the child makes. With this insight, we can just publish a simple one-pager, and that can go to every teacher, so they know what mistakes students will make even before they've taught the topic, right? And that sort of is a non-linear way of reaching the masses and the numbers that have been discussed. Similarly, there are 6 different ways to get comparison of 2 decimals wrong. Some think that 3.25 is bigger than 3.7 just because it's longer. But another set thinks 3.5 is bigger than 3.71 because 5 in the hundredths place has more weightage, and so on and so forth. So what technology can do is it can personalize it, and it can do it for the cheapest Android smartphone. But even where technology is not there, the ideas generated from technology can essentially reach. Because the traditional, you can do better teacher training once you know what to train them on. And I don't think just saying how to keep a classroom quiet or how to sort of do pedagogy works. The best form of teacher training is concept-specific teacher training, available just in time, before I'm about to enter the classroom teaching that topic, which has prior data on student learning from a nationally represented thing or even my localized district thing on where students make mistakes and what can I do as a teacher to remediate it. Because remember, time is the scarcest resource money can't buy. There's really no point in remediation. There's no time left for remediation. So before the teacher starts teaching the topic, can we sort of make this available to the teacher in paper or in a PDF on a phone? So our emphasis right now is on FLN assessments. Can we come up with the most granular pieces that is not there today? So we know that half of grade 4 can't read a sentence, but why? Like, do we know that E ki matra is statistically harder to learn than U ki matra? Do we know that Chandrama bindu is hard and Sayunt Akshar like pyar is hard? Like, unless you come up with insights like those and explain what you can do to remediate it, we will not scale fast enough. And so every baby that's getting born every second and 25 million students that are getting are not going to get FL and will miss the bus. We have seen that no amount of summer bridge courses resolves learning gaps, despite the popularity of it. We have understood that everyone who's escaped grade 1 and automatically passed in grade 2, you never get the time to teach the basics again, and they just keep falling behind, and at some point they just fall out, which is why less than half the students graduate grade 10 who entered in grade 1. So if the child, as sort of shown in the video, is learning in school and out of school, they are always in resonant frequency with then what the teacher and the curriculum is doing for them to stay and then eventually have meaningful careers.
I think that's what I'm taking away right now is just that there is already a mechanism here, an ecosystem here that's complementing each other really well, right? Like Pranav mentioned, one can't really take away the human aspect of reaching out and imparting education, but what can we do around it to make it more scalable? I think that's just beautiful. And I feel like complementing is where I want to kind of bring in the element of corporate funding, corporate social responsibility, if you will, because a very large part of the action we probably need to take, and everyone's been talking about it, is support from corporates, from big business houses, and so on. I wanted to start with you, Mamta, obviously, given that you lead a foundation that's been there for so long doing this. The one question I have is, how is it that we can, substantiate outcomes, or should we substantiate outcomes, the consequences we've been able to have, the impact we've been able to have? Is there a need to do this better for the corporate world to kind of take notice, drive these initiatives forward? Because there seems to be the technology is in place, there seems to be the kind of people that we've seen today make so much difference are in place. So what should we do to kind of bridge that gap? Is it understanding? Is it the lack of focus on outcomes? What is it, and what are some of the things that, in your experience, we can do differently?
So before I do that, I have to add to some of the points that Pranav said, very close to my heart. I completely agree with him when he says that you can't, the rate at which our population is going and the rate at which students are coming into the education, to get good quality teachers with complete understanding of education, not just these LOs have to be met by the end of this week. Really, really, really very, very difficult. I mean, you have only one test at the end of the day, So I do agree with him. And I'll focus on FLN first. We dealt with this problem, when we were setting up our schools and we had decided we'll take teachers from the villages, right? We created a very good training program. But we also realized how much soever training that you give, there would always be a gap. And the variety of children that existed in the classroom, can these young girls and boys really deal with it? One thing that we found very successful, and I'm kind of, in our programs with government, we are trying to push for it. Let's see whether we're able to. We made our children teachers, starting from class 1, and that solved some of the problems. So what happened, we actually created a summer program, not for children, for their grandparents and parents. We operate in villages, right? We gave them a small booklet, Kakaga, ABC, simple addition, and things like that. Now the thing is, when a child is teaching to the grandparent otherwise may be illiterate, but very intelligent, correct? So that grandparent will ask a question, why is 1.7 more than 1.35? Now a child cannot answer that. And when we started this campaign, every 10 days, teacher had to come to the school, because now little kids have questions to ask. Because grandparents are smart, and we could run this program in villages. Joint families still exist. I do not know how much of it is still relevant in, big cities. But in our schools, we have never had you ask a child to read, comprehension is the thing we used to test. Nothing before that. Can you understand? Can you create a story? So I do agree that we can't get teachers at the same rate, But yes, there are certain processes when you bring the surround family in, you know, and I think somebody talked about it, the role of parents and grandparents, but we're saying the other way around. We actually turned students into teachers. And when you have to become a teacher, you really have to prepare very hard to answer the questions that grandparents are, asking. Second thing he talked about, role of technology. I completely agree with him. There is one model that we've created. We talked about innovative models earlier. You've not asked me that question now. Very bad. So in our schools as well, in Jodhpur, we were finding it very difficult to hire teachers. There were a lot of teacher vacancies. And that's when our technology came in. So our teachers from Punjab beamed into our schools in Jodhpur, right? So since the Satya Bharti school philosophy is the same, our teaching practices are the same, the children are from the same, so yes, Punjabi teachers had to kind of speak in Hindi. They practiced that. But their connection with children was so great. Same schooling chain, And we actually found that we could solve teacher problem to a great, great extent by beaming teachers in. So there's one idea we're still discussing at our board level is, at state level, if you set up at the, at the capital, you set up a virtual teacher center, right? And you can decide it can only be for 9 to 12. You have so much problem with science teachers and things like that. All senior secondary government schools have technology, right? You get one great physics teacher sitting centrally in the capital, and you beam them into various schools. So even if you have a trainee teacher on the other side, can actually help children. And children in 9th and 12th are fairly independent. And this is something we've done in our Satya Bharti schools. Wherever there's a teacher vacancy, teacher from another school beams in. So technology to an extent, but yes, he's correct. We will have to look at technology to see how do we actually, I will say not only empower children to study, but we do have to look at technology to even give agency to teachers. I do agree with your point that teaching community has a much larger purpose. We are driven by our immediate goals, there and now, final exam. He joked about it, but it's correct, from FLN to board exams. Pranav said that, So there are certain things that we'll have to deal with sooner and quicker. And that kind of brings me to the question that you've asked. In education, sometimes I think we are limited by what we can measure, and then therefore focus a lot on what we can measure. Having said that, is that important? Yes, it's very important, because like Pranav is saying, and we've used some of this one-page PDFs that he's talking about. Bharti Foundation is building an app for teachers, the teacher app. We'll be starting it somewhere in May, June. Right now we're only testing that app, and we have 35,000 teachers on that app from private schools. We built that app for government schools, but half of the teachers are from private schools, discovering content. And these are self-paced learning modules. So that's not content for students, that's content for teachers to improve. And we found this exceptional content EI has built, which actually solves for the problems teachers are facing. So we immediately partnered EI, we requested Pranav to share that. Powerful modules, and we showed it to a group of teachers, and they were simply blown away with the research that exists, which would actually empower them to solve day-to-day problems in the schools. So while, yes, we must measure, because measurement only throws insights, the kind of insights Pranav is sharing, but I would still stay with, education has a much, much larger purpose. And philanthropists, corporate foundations, everybody who's working in education sector has to recognize that first. Good human beings, caring individuals, responsible individuals who would not take up to crime, would not beat their family in the evening. These are the kind of human beings we have to, bring up.
So beautiful, and most of the speakers today have really been alluding to that. They're all talking about how do we build a community that's just kinder to the whole aspect of education to start with. But I want to stay with that question, and essentially, I know we're running way over time, but I definitely want to bring in perspective because this is important, and all three of you come from different perspectives. So Anil, how about you? So the question really is, where does the gap lie between the general community that can potentially fund this, can potentially support this financially, and what's actually going on? Because there are so many stories and narratives we've seen, so much that you've done in your lifetime. But there still seems to be a gap, seemingly a gap between how much support there is and what areas need to be supported. So just what are your views on what are some of the priority areas and how would we need to approach the larger business community, if you will, to kind of drive some of these things together?
Yeah, so even when we look at gaps, like, me also just kind of probably respond to where Pranav and Mamta left off in the technology point too. So like when we look at gaps too, like let's say for example, typically we look at technology as a way to bridge certain gaps in learning. That's one point. And also as as a strategic tool to teach subjects. Pranav talked about, like, for example, you may not get adequate number of teachers tomorrow, and in which case you can use technology for assessing student strengths and weaknesses and make remediation, right? So, but the other one is using technology to gain knowledge in technology. So, for example, we at TIS, my colleagues Amina Charani and others have also done this project called problem-based learning using technology. Okay. Now, problem-based learning using technology, you may use it in languages, you may use it in science, or you could use it in any subject. But it's not just to learn the subject better. It is to use technology to create something. And that is a very critical skill. I mean, tomorrow you're not going to use technology just to learn mathematics or science. Tomorrow you're going to use technology to create something. So are we equipping our children to do that, right? And when we do something like that, the measurement cannot be an MCQ-based assessment on what they learned. The measurement also is around the kind of activities that they do. Like for instance, at work, when we do work, we are not, our performance, appraisal is not based on MCQ, based on the kind of things that we did. It's an assessment of how you did what you did, right? But over here are measurements, because you can't do this kind of artifact-based measurements at scale. So so the challenge is scale and implementation, or economics, or the financial part of it. And the challenge is not to do with we're not addressing the challenge of pedagogy, or we're not addressing the challenge of learning. Most times we'll be looking at scale issues, and because of which you can't do certain things, right? So that's an aspect that we need to think about.
That's brilliant. But yes, Pranav, just wanted you to kind of help us from that whole perspective of how does the business community engage better with what's already going on, and how do we what is it that we need to do as an action plan to be able to make this communication more transparent, more in the areas where it demands support?
So in terms of money, right, the government spends 3.5 lakh crores on education every year, and that's our taxpayers' money. There's also another 3.5 lakh crores on top spent by the private sector, so altogether we're spending 7 lakh crores in education. This roughly translates to about 15 to 20,000 rupees per child per year, and for that much money, we're essentially not seeing increasing learning outcomes. For the last 20 years, learning outcomes in India have not increased. We stood second last on PISA in 2012. If we test again, we're probably going to stand second last again. In the context of so much money being spent, what is the marginal rupee or dollar from a corporate best used for? So all the CSR in education put together is about 6,000 crores a year, which is 1% of what the other spending is. The 1% can actually influence what the 99% can do by running the most risky experiments. So corporates should take the most risky bets when they give CSR. One of our times I've gone so many talking about edtech, and many people say, अच्छा बिहार के उस district में करके दिखाओ तो समझ में आएगा कि edtech चलता है कि नहीं. And for a long time I said, let's work in enabling conditions. But we got the Great Eastern Shipping, CSR to sort of go to Bihar in that remotest part and essentially try out technology-based learning there. Now that's a good use of money because Bihar government on its own is not giving. safe donors are not giving. So, GE, CSR wanting to give it for Bihar is a good use of money to show evidence that this works in, let's say, a handful of 50 schools, so that the remaining 50,000 schools in Bihar and the remaining 1.5 million schools in India can learn lessons from under-resourced settings, experimenting with edtech. So in summary, I think, to improve learning outcomes at scale, we need non-linear ideas which can elevate the quality of the available human being. Whatever the teacher is doing today, how can they do it 100% better? This is not going to come through cascade training. It's going to come through ideas. Technology can complement this, because then the child's learning is accelerated in ways that even the world's best teacher cannot sort of do it. And ultimately, if money is being spent, whether it's by USAID or essentially by a corporate, how can it fund experiments that then the balance 99% can take it to scale?
Thank you so much, Pranav. And in fact, we've run out of time. But I really want to thank the panelists. I think it's opened up a lot of questions, as has the rest of the day. So really appreciate you being here, and thank you for having us, audience.